We are talking about resetting in order to reproduce. We talked about pruning and about John 15 and the vine and how ultimately that would produce more fruit. And as a disciple, that's what we're looking for, right? Do you think the Western church has done a very good job of adopting this philosophy and adopting this way of becoming more like Christ?
Mm-hmm. Well, Casey, I do think it is a growing discussion in terms of really what is the basic DNA of being a follower of Jesus, becoming like Christ, and growing in that relationship, along with what does it mean to be a disciple maker who's making disciples who make disciples. I think there's a growing narrative, there's a growing discussion about that. I am encouraged that you do see some of the adjustments, but our cultural context here in the West, particularly in America where we're at, is very different than a lot of other places in the world. Mm-hmm. And we want to celebrate that. And we want to celebrate that God's used all that, but we also want to realize that times have changed, people have changed, cultures change, circumstances have changed. Again, prayer doesn't change, God doesn't change, the gospel doesn't change. God's mandate for us to make disciples of all nations, that doesn't change, but maybe the way we go about it could be adjusted, just like in sports. Most of the listeners quickly identify with this. I mean, volleyball hasn't changed, but the way they play it's a little bit different. Mm-hmm. Football hasn't changed, but the way they approach it, from a quarterback or from the different positions is a little bit different. The positions are the same, but it can be approached different ways. You can be coached different ways. You can be trained different ways. You can be prepared different ways to be more successful as an athlete. So we're saying that we believe we should enter into this discussion of what's happening outside of North America, outside of the United States, in terms of church planning, disciple making, and reproducing and things like that. What can we learn from those brothers and sisters? What do they bring to the table? But the challenge is, what it does at times is it challenges us, and it challenges our paradigms, it challenges our assumptions. But then if we go back to the John 15 and have a reset moment, and just reevaluate gently and lovingly, the Lord does point out, just a simple little halftime adjustment to make us more effective in whatever ministry God's called us to.
I think what I hear you saying is not just as a disciple, I need to be resetting, mm-hmm. but also as a church, we need to be resetting. Are there some trends, some things that you're seeing in churches that you're like, okay, I think this is a place where we need to reconsider. Do we need to reset in order for us to be able to reproduce as a church? Maybe that's just growing in depth. Maybe that's growing in disciples. Maybe that's growing numerically. Maybe it's growing by planting another church. But whatever that might be, do you feel like there are ways that the church can pivot toward resetting in any of those areas?
No, Casey, I do. I mean, it all starts at the top, not to put all the pressure on the leadership, but as we say in leadership, everything rises and falls on leadership, right? And so I think for me, the big shift that is still something I'm learning is in Ephesians, and we want to anchor this in scriptures. That would be the first question. Is what we're doing biblical? Is what we're talking about really biblical? So if we look at Ephesians 4, it says that Christ is given to the church, his body that he loves and redeemed by his own blood. He's given to the church apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers. Now, there's 5 of them in the text. Now, we don't often talk about all of them, and that's okay. So even listeners that say, well, we don't talk about all 5, that's okay. Whichever one you talk about, which is normally just the pastor and the teacher.
Right,
so we'll focus on that. Well, then it says, Christ gave to the church pastors and teachers. Why? To equip the saints to do the work of the ministry. So to me, that's already a place of pivot or a possible adjustment, because it appears that a lot of our paradigm, things are centered around the pastor. And that's not bad. That's not wrong. We're not saying that's immoral. We're not saying that's sinful. But we're saying maybe that needs to be adjusted or pivoted a little bit, because the role of a pastor, teacher in spiritual ministry is to train, to coach, to equip, to mentor, to empower others, so every member of the body of Christ is being released. Now, and that's happening in mega churches and small churches alike, but it goes back to the leadership making some of those adjustments. And so, for example, here in the States, we have programs and we have buildings, and we're not against any of that. Now, our model, of course, overseas is more of a house church, because Partly that's really all that we can do, and partly
Yeah.
because that's what we're seeing reproducing and multiplying. But even an established legacy church here in North America that has paid professionals and programs, we're not saying that's bad. We're just saying, could we reset for a moment, reevaluate for a moment? Is that really equipping every member of that church to be involved in whatever God's, called them to be involved in? And are we really making disciples that make disciples that make disciples? And are we seeing reproducing not only the life of Christ, but, disciple making and ministry in and through that church? And we would hope in resetting, if we realize, wow, maybe we're not measuring up, to what John 15 talks about or what the Acts chapter 2 church, describes, we would be humble enough then to reset and make some adjustments.
Yeah.
Yeah.